Welcome to True Freedom, where we explore profound philosophies to uncover the essence of true freedom in life. Have you ever wondered why someone would choose solitude to find freedom? Or why Nietzsche, one of the greatest philosophers of all time, believed that solitude is the key to true freedom? As Nietzsche once said, "Choose the good solitude, a free, high-spirited, light-hearted solitude that in some sense gives you the right to stay good yourself." Imagine if Henry David Thoreau, the author of the famous Walden, hadn't spent time alone by the lake. Could he have written his timeless reflections on life and freedom? So, what do you think about the connection between solitude and freedom? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. In today's podcast, we'll dive deep into Nietzsche's philosophy of solitude, exploring how it helps us break free from societal pressures, reconnect with ourselves, and discover the true meaning of freedom. Get ready to embark on this inspiring journey with true freedom. Choose the good solitude, the free, high-spirited, light-hearted solitude that in some sense gives you the right to stay good yourself. Nietzsche's life was one of solitude. His later period in life was spent almost in complete isolation. At the age of 24, he was offered the position of a professor of classical philology before completing his doctorate or receiving a teaching certificate. He remains, to this day, among the youngest of the tenured classics professors on record. He taught at the University of Basel from 1816 to 1878. Nietzsche's poor health worsened, and he was forced to leave his professorship. He had also felt that academic life was a hindrance to his creative thinking. He retired with a modest pension of 3,000 Swiss francs, which represented 2/3 of his annual salary. The pension, though awarded for only 6 years, was actually paid in full until 1889, the year of his mental breakdown. This money was Nietzsche's main source of income for the remaining years of his productive life, spanning from 1879 to 1888. In his period as an independent philosopher, he plunged into his creative work while plagued with continued ill health. Nietzsche's personal attitude involved a hidden and solitary aspect of his outward persona. Carl Jung writes, "I was held back by a secret fear that I might perhaps be like him, at least in regard to the secret, which had isolated him from his environment." Perhaps, who knows, he had had inner experiences, insights which he had unfortunately talked about, and had found out that no one understood him. Sigmund Freud, in rare praise, noted that Nietzsche had a more penetrating knowledge of himself than any other man who ever lived or was ever likely to live. Nietzsche traveled frequently to find climates more beneficial to his health, and lived in different cities as an independent author. He spent his summers in the coolness of Sils Maria, Switzerland, and his winters in the warmth of the Italian cities of Genoa, Rapallo, and Turin, as well as the French city of Nice. During these travels, he often reflected on how environment shaped human thought and creativity. For instance, the serene mountains of Sils Maria inspired his idea of the eternal recurrence, while the vibrant streets of Turin fueled his writings on morality and culture. He also wrote many letters to his colleagues. However, for the most part, he was alone. Apart from writing, he used to take long walks that could last several hours. These walks became a form of meditation, allowing him to process complex ideas. As Henry David Thoreau once said, "An early morning walk is a blessing for the whole day," a sentiment Nietzsche would have surely agreed with. Nietzsche considered himself as the solitary wanderer and hermit, the free spirit that had experienced a great liberation from the traditions that had kept him chained. Solitude became the origin of a new category of thinker, a philosopher of the future, a free spirit. We are the born, sworn, jealous friends of solitude, of our profoundest midnight and midday solitude. Such kind of men are we free spirits. And perhaps you are something of this yourselves, you who are approaching, you new philosophers. He further elaborates that one must, Remain master of one's four virtues: courage, insight, sympathy, solitude. Because solitude is a virtue for us, since it is a sublime inclination and impulse to cleanliness which shows that contact between people inevitably makes things unclean. Somewhere, sometime, every community makes people base. Solitude is best expressed in the figure of Zarathustra, the solitary wanderer. When Zarathustra was 30 years old, he left his home and the lake of his home and went into the mountains. Here he enjoyed his spirit and his solitude, and for 10 years he did not tire of it. At last, a change came over his heart, and one morning he rose with the dawn, stepped before the sun, and spoke to it thus: "You great star, what would your happiness be had you not those for whom you shine? For 10 years you have climbed to my cave. You would have tired of your light and of the journey, had it not been for me and my eagle and my serpent. But we waited for you every morning, took your overflow from you, and blessed you for it. Behold, I am weary of my wisdom. Like a bee that has gathered too much honey, I need hands outstretched to receive it. I would give away and distribute, until the wise among men find joy once again in their folly, and the poor in their riches. For that I must descend to the depths, as you do in the evening when you go behind the sea and still bring light to the underworld, you over-rich star. Like you, I must go down, as is said by man, to whom I want to descend. So bless me then, you quiet eye that can look even upon all to great happiness without envy. Bless the cup that wants to overflow, that the water may flow from it golden and carry everywhere the reflection of your delight. Behold, this cup wants to become empty again, and Zarathustra wants to become man again." Thus began Zarathustra's down-going. Zarathustra's solitude was very fruitful, but there comes a moment when he grows weary of his wisdom. Solitude seems, therefore, to be a temporary matter. He wishes to share his teachings, and thus he begins his descent into mankind. However, he fails to teach the people no matter how hard he tries. In fact, he feels more isolated with the people than being alone with himself, like a black sheep. Despite appearances, the mediocre man is actually isolated from himself and progressively absorbed in a faceless collectivity, which ends up suffocating his individuality. Nietzsche himself was acutely aware of his psychological isolation and joked to one of his correspondents that he was the hermit of Sils Maria. On one of his drafts in his last work Ex Homo, he writes, "I am solitude become man." He considered his contemporaries as parroting culture and society in their ideas, writings, and daily life because they lack the will to delve into their own being and derive meaning and ideas from a thorough examination of oneself, which can only be achieved by cultivating solitude. He writes, "When I am among the many, I live as the many do, and I do not think as I really think. After a time it always seems as though they want to banish me from myself and rob me of my soul, and I grow angry with everybody and fear everybody. I then require the desert, so as to grow good again. And I need solitude, that is to say, recovery, return to myself, the breathing of free, crisp, bracing air. The whole of my Zarathustra is a dithyramb in honor of solitude." Zarathustra eventually ends up going back into solitude, but this time he focuses on a small minority of higher men, who, unlike the crowd, possess virtues of introspection, discipline, self-overcoming, and other aspects constitutive of the life. An individual who isolates himself without ever valuing external opinions will only have his conscience with himself, and nobody to ever confront or challenge his views. This is why Zarathustra must find higher men for his mental elevation. He suggests that our enemies are actually adversaries whose ideas have the potential of improving our own. He writes, "My brothers in war, I love you deeply, because I am and have been your equal, and I am also your best enemy. You should be the kind of men whose eyes always seek an enemy, your enemy. You should seek your enemy, wage your war and for your thoughts, and when your thought is defeated, then your honesty should cry out in triumph even for that." Solitude is thus not just a result of the contempt of the masses, but allows one to forge a more profound longing for a community that allows one to explore the best version of oneself. Company is important, and if chosen well can be mutually beneficial. In this sense, introspective solitude is compatible with life in community, but it is also necessary to retreat into complete solitude once in a while, in order to receive its fruits. Now I bid you lose me and find yourselves, and only when you have all denied me will I return to you. Indeed, with different eyes, my brothers, will I then seek my lost ones, with a different love will I love you then. A temporary retreat into solitude helps to dissolve one's entrapment in being a mere member of a crowd, where society is thought of as higher than its members. Anyone who questions and goes against society is ridiculed and ostracized, so to the solitary wanderer. The solitary is he who challenges society's desire to turn the human being into an absolutely gregarious animal. There is great risk in wanting to live and think like a solitary, for he is expected to conform to culture and popular opinion. Yet it is the solitary who is free, while the masses have renounced their will and have become conformists. However, in solitude, everything that one carries with him grows, including one's inner beast. Today you suffer still from the many, you lonely one, for today you still have your courage and your hopes intact. But one day solitude will make you weary, one day your pride will cringe and your courage will gnash its teeth. One day you will cry, I am alone. One day you will no longer see your high, and your low will appear to near. Your sublimity itself will frighten you like a ghost. One day you will cry, everything is false. There are feelings that want to kill the lonely one. If they do not succeed, well, then they must die themselves. But are you capable of being a murderer? Nietzsche indicates that only a few people can bear solitude, but these will be able to harvest its fruits. Solitude has an aspect of a sense of belonging that is not present in the crowd. Being physically isolated, however, does not imply automatically and instantaneously getting rid of the social imprint, because society not only makes an appearance outside of oneself, but also within oneself through a common conscience. It is an inner voice that contains the norms and habits that prevail at the civic level, and to a greater or lesser extent condition our way of speaking, interpreting, reflecting, acting, and in short, living. That is why Nietzsche urges us to reflect upon this inner voice that conditions our life, and that is only possible in solitude. Flee, my friend, into your solitude. I see you dazed by the noise of the great men and stunned by the stings of the little. Forest and rock know well how to be silent with you. Be once more like the tree that you love, the broad branching one. Silent and listening it hangs over the sea. Where solitude ends, there begins the marketplace, and where the marketplace begins, there begins to the noise of the great actors and the buzzing of poisonous flies. You have lived too long near the small and the pitiable man. Flee their invisible revenge. Against you they are nothing but revenge. Being in solitude allows one to see one's constant anxious consideration of the opinions that others hold of you and one's captivity in the quick pace of modern life that pressures everyone to become workaholics. The result is alienation and fragmentation of the self. Solitude makes possible again the practices of contemplation, which puts oneself in touch with one's deep sources of wellness. On this perfect day, when everything is ripening, and not only the grapes are getting brown, a ray of sunshine has fallen on my life. I looked behind me, I looked before me, and never have I seen so many good things all at once. How could I help being thankful to the whole of my life?
All right, so solitude. We usually think of it, peace and quiet, maybe a little escape. But what if it's way more powerful than that? What if it's essential for really figuring out how you think, what you believe, your own path, basically? And we're going to get into all that with Friedrich Nietzsche. Now, before you tune out thinking this is going to be some stuffy philosophy lecture, I promise we're going for actionable stuff here. The insights that can actually like shift your perspective.
Yeah, it's really interesting how most folks are kind of scared of solitude, right? Want to avoid it at all costs. But for Nietzsche, that was the thing, like the key to a deeper kind of freedom. You know what I mean?
Exactly. And to help us out, we've got an episode of the True Freedom podcast. They're all about philosophy. They get into Nietzsche's ideas in a really clear way. And just to blow your mind a little bit right off the bat, Nietzsche wasn't some hermit hiding in the mountains, right? This guy was a young university professor, successful, the whole deal. But he had some wild ideas, like about needing enemies to actually help us grow. We'll get to that, don't worry. But just get ready, folks, to maybe rethink how you see being alone.
Yeah, and I think, to grasp what he's about, you got to realize Nietzsche wasn't talking about just being physically alone, It was deeper. He wanted to separate from, like, the dominant ideas of his time, the values, all that, even if it meant being different. Thinking for himself was the goal.
Okay, so picture this. Young, brilliant professor, killing it in academia, then boom, health problems, he has to leave. Becomes this like wandering philosopher dude traveling all over Europe. Not exactly the image that pops in your head when you say philosopher, huh?
Nope, not at all. And that wandering, it wasn't just him moving around geographically. It was like a conscious choice to break from all the intellectual norms, even the ones in academia, right?
Yeah.
He felt like an outsider, even among those guys.
Mm.
And that feeling, that outsiderness, that becomes like central to his whole philosophy.
So solitude enters the picture. And Nietzsche, he doesn't just say it's good. He calls it a sublime inclination and impulse to cleanliness. What's he getting at with that? Sounds a little intense, right?
It is intense, but it gets to the core of how he saw things,
Yeah.
Nietzsche thought all that constant contact with people, it could actually, like, dirty the mind. And think about it for a second. How often were you just, like, repeating someone else's opinion or following the latest trend? For Nietzsche, solitude, that was like the mental cleanse. Gets rid of the gunk so you can get back to your own authentic thoughts, your own values.
Like hitting the reset button on your brain, kind of?
Right. Exactly that. Creating the space to think for yourself, without all that pressure to conform.
And this idea of solitude as a journey, it's really strong in the story of Zarathustra, right? Nietzsche's most famous character. Zarathustra, he goes into solitude, comes back to teach people, totally fails, and then retreats back to solitude. While the back and forth seems like a story arc worth paying attention to.
Oh, Zarathustra's journey, it's all about how tough it is to find your place, Even when he's surrounded by people, he feels alone because they're not really thinking, not questioning things the way he is. He realizes sometimes being around the wrong people is worse than being physically alone.
It's like, like that saying, loneliness isn't the absence of people, it's the absence of connection.
Boom, there it is. And Nietzsche, through Zarathustra, he's telling us you got to seek out connections that actually like feed your mind and soul, not just fill up space.
And Nietzsche, he wasn't just talking, lived this stuff, There's this story about him joking to a friend, called himself the Hermit of Sils Maria. And he straight up says in his writing, I am solitude become man. This wasn't just a theory, it was like his whole way of being.
Oh yeah, 100%. Embodied his philosophy. And that brings us to one of his most challenging and often misunderstood ideas. The idea that we need enemies.
Okay, this is where it gets kind of spicy, maybe even a little controversial. But hold on, he's not talking about like actual enemies, people we gotta fight.
No, not about conflict in that sense. What Nietzsche meant was we need people who challenge us intellectually, push us to actually defend our beliefs, explain why we think the way we do. That kind of stuff makes us refine our ideas, make them stronger. Solitude gives you the space to come up with those ideas, but you need those adversaries, those mental sparring partners to help you really sharpen them.
So it's like finding those people who can hold up a mirror to your thinking, even if what you see isn't always pretty.
Exactly. Embrace the intellectual friction, It's fuel for growth.
So having these enemies, these intellectual sparring partners, it can actually help us get closer to the truth. That's a pretty wild idea when you think about it.
It is, yeah. But think about it this way, like, when was the last time you really had to explain what you believe? Like, really articulate why you think that way? It's uncomfortable, right? But those moments when you're kind of forced to examine your own assumptions, dig deeper. That's where the growth is, right?
Yeah. It's like iron sharpens iron, right?
Yeah.
You need that opposing force to get a good edge.
Exactly. And that's what Nietzsche thought was missing back then. Too much agreement, Not enough real debate.
But okay, let's be real for a sec. Solitude, it's not always sunshine and roses. Nietzsche even says that, right? He talks about solitude making you weary, your pride will cringe. You might even start thinking everything is false. Not exactly a selling point.
Nope, not at all. And I think that's what's so cool about Nietzsche. He's brutally honest. He's not giving us some like romanticized version of being alone. He's saying straight up, this path, it's going to be tough. You might have to face some stuff about yourself, question everything you thought you knew. Are you ready for that? That's the question.
It's like a trial by fire, right? Got to go through the discomfort to come out stronger on the other side.
Exactly. And that's why Nietzsche believed most people, they can't handle real solitude. It takes like real self-awareness, courage. Most folks aren't willing to go there.
So how do we know if we're doing it right? How do we make sure our solitude is, leading us towards growth, not just making us doubt ourselves even more?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Yeah.
I think the key is being intentional about it. It's got to be a choice, not something you're forced into. And then use that time for stuff that actually feeds your mind and soul, reading, writing, maybe meditating, going out in nature, whatever helps you connect with yourself, your inner world.
So it's not just about being physically alone. It's about making that space, mentally and emotionally, to really reflect, to recharge.
Exactly. And it's about balance too, right?
Right.
Can't just be all solitude. We're human. We need connection.
Yeah.
But we need both time alone and time with others to really thrive.
Finding that sweet spot, right? Where you're good being alone, but you can also fully engage with the world.
Right on. And Nietzsche, he understood that. He wasn't saying, go live in a cave forever. He was saying, be more aware of how you spend your time, who you hang out with, how you take care of your inner world,
Now, you mentioned earlier Nietzsche was kind of an outsider, even in academia. What was it about his thinking that made him different?
Well, Nietzsche, he was like a radical questioner. He wasn't afraid to poke at anything. Didn't matter if it was philosophy, religion, morality. Always pushing boundaries, questioning the usual way of thinking, forcing people to really look at what they believed.
So he wasn't using solitude to just escape society. He was using it to come up with ideas that could, change it.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why he still matters today. We live in a world where everyone's supposed to fit in, follow the trends. Nietzsche reminds us it's okay to think differently. It's okay to challenge things, make your own path.
But that takes guts, right? Got to be willing to stand out even if people criticize you.
For sure. And that's where solitude comes in again. It's in those quiet moments when you're not worried about what others think that you can really hear your own voice, your own perspective. And that connection with yourself, that gives you the strength to be you and share that with the world.
So solitude, it's about taking back your power. The power to think your own thoughts, choose what you value, and live a life that's true to that.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
So we've been talking about how Nietzsche saw solitude as the path to being strong, independent, figuring out what you believe. But he didn't think we should all just run off and be hermits, right? What do you say about bringing those ideas back, connecting with others?
Great question. This is where people get him wrong, He's not about total isolation. Remember Zarathustra, right? He goes back to solitude after he messes up trying to teach everyone. But this time, it's different.
He's pickier about who he wants to talk to now.
Yeah, exactly. He's looking for those higher men, as he calls them. People who are ready for tough ideas, who are on that same kind of journey, figuring themselves out. It's like finding your tribe, the ones who get it.
So not fitting in with the crowd, but finding the folks who push you to be better.
Right. And solitude, it gives you the clarity to see those connections. Think about your own life.
Yeah.
Are there people you hang out with who just drain you? Maybe they gossip all the time, or they're just obsessed with shallow stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's those people, the ones who leave you feeling energized, like you actually learned something.
Like junk food versus a good meal for your mind.
Boom, there it is. And Nietzsche, he was all about being mindful of that, just like what you eat, right? Be mindful of who you spend your time with. Solitude helps you figure out who's who.
So it's not about cutting yourself off from the world. It's about being more careful about who you let in.
Right. Especially now, right? Everyone's telling you what to buy, who to be friends with. It's overwhelming. Mm-hmm. Solitude, it's like that step back. You can hear your own inner voice again.
A journey inward that leads to better stuff outward.
Love that. Nietzsche wasn't about escaping reality. It was about engaging with it, but on your terms. Think differently. Find your path. Find your people. That's good stuff.
This has been amazing, really makes you think. We've seen how solitude can be like the path to freedom, to really knowing yourself and then connecting with the right people. So as we wrap this up, what's like one final thought you'd leave with our listeners?
Well, Nietzsche believed most folks are just straight up scared of real solitude. That quiet, that stillness facing yourself.
Yeah.
It's tough. But for the people who are brave enough to try it, solitude, it can be like this incredible source of strength, clarity, joy, honestly. So if this deep dive, if it's resonated with you, if you're feeling that pull to extol who you are, don't ignore it. Embrace that solitude, cultivate your inner world, and then go out there and find your tribe. The world needs people who think for themselves, who aren't afraid to challenge things, and who are building a more authentic, fulfilling life. It all starts with you.
So, we've explored Nietzsche's profound philosophy of solitude and its role in helping individuals find true freedom. As Nietzsche wrote, "I need solitude, that is to say, recovery, return to myself, the breathing of free, crisp, bracing air." Solitude is not just a state, it's a journey of self-discovery and growth. If you found this episode helpful, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to True Freedom, and share your thoughts in the comments. Do you agree with Nietzsche's perspective? Or do you have your own story about solitude and freedom? Let us know, we'd love to hear from you. Thank you for joining us on this podcast. Apply these lessons from Nietzsche to your life and discover your own path to true freedom. See you in the next video on True Freedom.